Hello everyone, and welcome back. We're going over to part 2 of the landscape video. We're looking at the Eastern Conference landscape and seeing what teams could be doing what before trade deadline. We'll get to all that coming up right now. Hello everyone, welcome back to another video here at the Intent Hockey channel. Now before we get into this video, don't forget to like this video and subscribe down below. Thank you for all of your support. I've never been able to with all of you guys. So if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe down below and don't forget to leave a comment down in the comment section below so I'll discuss in today's video. Now I'm going to do my second part of my landscape video. I did my first part as the Western Conference landscape, looking at the landscape of the Western Conference. As you can see here, I'll link up in the YouTube cards. But I'm going to do the Eastern Conference now, the second part of this video. So once again, I'm going to go division by division, 1 through 8 right now via the standings. So we're going to start with the Florida Panthers in the Atlantic. They're a really good team right now. Elliot Friedman does think, mentioning this on his recent 32 Thoughts podcast, that the Panthers are looking for a forward help. He thinks that they could definitely be looking at some forwards like Gensel, like Buchnevich, but they don't have too much assets, so they're going to have to be creative in the way to try and add. He does think that there is some interest in a guy like Noah Hannafin, but he thinks it's a little bit less likely, and he does wonder how much of their business they get done before the deadline, free agent wise. Could they sign Montour, Forsling, or Reinhart before deadline? Definitely going to be interesting to see what happens with Florida. With Boston, he thinks that they are in the situation right now where they're probably going to have to move players off their roster to gain players on their roster. He thinks that they're looking at a defenseman, they're looking at a forward, potentially a center too. They really need a center help. He does wonder about Linus Ullmark. More likely that's an off-season move, given the fact that he says that he has a modified no-trade clause and it's a lot harder to move it in season. So we'll have to wait and see exactly what happens with Ullmark, but definitely expect the Bruins to move pieces off their roster to try and upgrade the roster, given the fact that they don't really have too much trade capital to work with right now too. So it's going to be interesting to see exactly what happens with Boston. With Toronto, he thinks that they're still looking for a defenseman. He joked about Justin Hull being a potential trade target for the Toronto Maple Leafs. They could be looking at a guy like David Savard. Nick Jensen was the name that was brought up. So we'll also wait to see exactly what happens with the Leafs, but they're definitely looking for a right shot defenseman. He also thinks they're looking for a depth forward to try and help their forward depth a little bit too. So watch out for the Leafs to try and add some players before the deadline. Detroit, he thinks that they're going to be an interesting team to watch out for. He thinks that they are shopping a couple of defensemen to try and make some cap space. There has been some talk about Gostisbehere and Hull, and he could be looking at trying to add some pieces. He doesn't think that Gensel's probably likely a fit there, given the fact that Steve Yzerman doesn't like to give term to players. So we'll have to wait and see exactly what happens there. But definitely, I still think Detroit adds on the blue line personally. So we'll have to wait and see exactly what happens with Detroit. Tampa, probably not going to do very much. Elliot Friedman says that the boldest decision they could do at the trade deadline is to decide to not go for it this year. They're not the best team. Kucherov is having a phenomenal season, and the rest of the Bolts are lacking a little bit over the past little while. So, I mean, Kucherov has a 40-point lead in the Bolts locker room, and on top of that, Vasilevsky's looked human this year. So maybe they don't go out and get the big ads at this year's trade deadline and move a lot of pieces. It's against their DNA, but it's possible they could wind up staying pat a little bit, maybe just tinkering with a few things just on the outside of their roster. So we'll have to wait and see what happens with Tampa, but they're not doing overly well right now. They're still in the playoff spot, but they're not the dominant Tampa team they once were, and maybe they just don't go for it this year. Buffalo, he definitely thinks that all the UFAs are going to be moved. Johnson, Olsen, potentially Oposo and Girgensons. So expect their UFAs to be moved. Could definitely move a couple of other pieces too. He does wonder about Casey Milstead. That could be a guy who ends up being moved, but he thinks that all of their bigger and more serious decisions will come in the offseason. So I'll expect Milstead to be a guy who ends up being decided in the offseason. If they were to try and make some massive upgrade, probably going to happen in the offseason. So I'll probably expect Buffalo, just like Elliot Friedman said, to just move their pending UFAs. Montreal, he doesn't expect too much out of. He says that David Savard, if there was a big enough offer, could potentially be moved, but there's not a guarantee David Savard winds up getting moved. On top of that, he says there's a lot of talk now that Jordan Harris, who's a young defenseman over in Montreal, could definitely be a potentiality of being a trade chip for the Canadians. So that's a possibility given their depth on their blue line, but we probably won't see very much out of Montreal, so we'll have to wait and see on them. And for the Ottawa Senators, he does think that they're definitely going to move their pending UFAs. He says that Steve Staios is not opposed to making some bigger moves, but that would probably more likely happen in the offseason, and they're taking a hard look at some goaltending help for that team. So we'll have to wait and see exactly what happens with the Ottawa Senators, but definitely it sounds like they'll probably wait until the offseason to make some major adjustments to this roster, and they'll probably just make some moves to sell off their pending UFAs right now. So I'm looking at Tarasenko, Kubalik. Some people who need D help. Elliot Friedman says they've been checking in on Eric Brandstrom, so that could be another potential move there for the Senators too. So we'll have to wait and see exactly what happens, but they could definitely make a Chikrin move. They could definitely make a couple of upgrades to their goaltending. Do wonder about guys like Markstrom, Saros, and Elmark, but that's more likely in the offseason. So we'll have to wait and see exactly what happens there with the Ottawa Senators, but expect them to definitely make some moves just to move their UFAs right now and probably make some more bigger moves in the offseason. So we'll have to wait and see exactly what happens there. But recap, Florida going to try and add some forward depth. He doesn't think it's as pressing of a need on the blue line, and Elliot Friedman does think that there's a very likely chance this team could look to try and get some creative ways to add this before a deadline. Boston going to try and move some players off their roster to upgrade their roster. He does think Allmark is a possibility, although that's more of an off-season move. Could DeBrusk and Grzelcyk be guys who go off the roster to make the cap work? Both guys are pending phase. Potentially, those guys could be moved. I do wonder about some other picks and prospects too that could be moved. Toronto don't have too much picks and prospects, just like Boston, Florida, Tampa, but they are looking to try and add a right shot defenseman. They've been linked to Jensen, Savard, so could they look to try and add a defenseman? Also looking for a depth forward. Detroit probably looking to move a couple of defensemen. They have really good logjam there, but they could be looking to upgrade that blue line. Gostisbehere could be moved. Hull could be moved. So we have to wait and see exactly what happens there. Buffalo probably just going to move the UFAs. Ottawa probably just going to move the UFAs. Both those GMs sounds like they're going to make some huge, massive moves in the offseason, so we'll have to wait a little bit of time to watch out for there. Maybe there's a chance that they wind up making some moves in the before a deadline, but most likely it's going to happen in the offseason. For Montreal, they've already made their huge move by moving Monahan. Probably won't do very much at this point in time either, so interesting stuff there. Going over to the Metro Division with the Rangers, Elliot Friedman does think that Novak was a potentiality to go there, but Novak re-signed with Nashville, so they can't really try and acquire him, so we'll have to wait and see exactly what happens with the Rangers, but definitely they could try and look to add like a second or third line center. They could try and add a right winger. I've seen some people say they could try and add another depth defenseman, so we'll have to wait and see on the Rangers. Carolina Hurricanes, Elliot Friedman does think that they don't look to go after UFAs and pay big prices, but he says at some point they have to go for it, and maybe this is their year given the fact they have a feeling they can win the Stanley Cup. He does wonder about Gensel with Carolina. I could definitely see that being a possibility. They need some more offense. I wonder about Buchnevich. I wonder about Vetrano. Those two could also be really good players, and they have a little bit of term on them, so we'll have to wait and see on the Carolina Hurricanes, but expect them to definitely upgrade. They weren't able to get goals last year in the third round against Florida. They could be looking to try and add some more goal scoring abilities, so we'll have to wait and see on that. On top of that, D'Angelo has been made available, according to Frank Saravalli, by the Carolina Hurricanes, and they're willing to retain 50% of his contract, so we'll have to wait and see on the D'Angelo stuff too. The goaltending wise, it sounds like Anderson's going to be back soon, so they're probably not going to add a goaltender at this point in time, so we'll have to wait and see on that. For the Philadelphia Flyers, Elliot Friedman does think that this team will probably still sell. Walker, Sealer, both guys are asking for huge pieces of money. Walker, it sounds like $4.5–5 million on a 5-year deal. Steelers looking for north of $3 million. That's too much for the Philadelphia Flyers right now, so there's a very lucky chance both guys wind up being moved. Steelers are really good third pair defenseman. Walker's a really good top four defenseman. They could get huge asking prices for those two guys, so we'll have to wait and see on the Flyers, but expect those two guys to get moved. Maybe Scott Lawton too, that's a possibility as well, but we'll have to wait and see exactly what happens there. Besides that, I really don't see very much. Maybe they make a couple of depth additions. Elliot Friedman does think that if they were to try and go for the playoffs, they could make a few small moves, such as trying to add a cheap goaltender, cheap forward to try and go for a playoff run, even though they do move a couple of pieces, so we'll have to wait and see exactly what happens there. On top of that, Washington, NYR, New Jersey, Pittsburgh, all interesting teams. He thinks the Owls will probably stand pat, maybe add a couple more pieces. They're not too far out of the playoffs right now, currently 6 points out, 3 games in hand. They're not too far behind the Flyers. There's a very likely chance that the Islanders could want to be trying to add a couple of pieces, maybe just a few depth pieces. They don't usually sell. He says that there was a lot of talk about Brock Nelson, but that's not going to happen. And Lou Lamoriello doesn't usually like to sell pieces, so they're usually going to stand pat or make a few small additions probably, so that's what to expect for the Islanders. Capitals, it sounds like they're going in a different direction now. Using that top cleared waivers, they're probably going to make some trades before a trade deadline. You have Edmonton on the blue line, Pacioretty and Manson on the forward group who are pending UFAs. There's been a lot of talk about Nick Dowd. There's been a lot of talk earlier earlier in the season about TJ Oshie as a possibility of being moved. Elliot Friedman does wonder about the goaltending. That might be more of an off-season thing, but he says that Clay Stevenson is having a fantastic season over in the AHL and maybe a backup for the Capitals as early as next year. So could they move Kemper or Lindgren? So that's going to be an interesting situation to watch out for. But even though the Capitals are not too far of a playoff spot, they have a lot of pending UFAs and they could definitely make some moves. So we'll have to wait and see on that. Devils, it sounds like they're probably wanting to try and add Markstrom. If not right now, then in the offseason. That's sort of the guy who they try to target right now. So we'll see about that. But on top of that, they have a really sour stretch. Could they move to Foley? It's a possibility. Elliot Friedman does think it's more of a pipe dream, but I have seen some other people say it's a possibility. So we'll have to wait and see exactly what happens there. But Toffoli is going to be the huge name to watch out for in New Jersey. If they continue to lose and lose a couple more games for a deadline, maybe it does wind up happening on trade deadline day. So we'll have to wait and see on that. Pittsburgh, very likely possibility that they are going to be moving a ton of pieces. They're 10 points out right now of a playoff spot. They have 4 games in hand, I think, on the Flyers and the Lightning. So they're not looking overly good. They have to hope they win all those games in hand. They could definitely make a lot of moves. Elliot Friedman does think they will look to move a lot of pieces. Riley Smith is one of them. Marcus Pettersson, Jake Gensel are some of the names. I definitely see him look at the moves from other guys. He thinks they will move a goaltender, most likely Nedeljkovic. There's definitely probably a couple of other guys they could move to. So we'll have to watch out on the Penguins. They could be a very busy team over the next couple of days. And the Columbus Blue Jackets. He thinks that they're probably, just like sort of the Ottawa Senators and Buffalo Sabres, they're probably going to make some of their major adjustments in the offseason. So expect the Jackets to make moves such as moving out guys like potentially Boone Jenner and making decisions on that in the offseason. But he says that if there's a deal for Provorov, they can make that before a deadline. Mercelikins, that you can make that before a deadline. Well, I think that's a little bit less likely. I do wonder about Roslovic because we're pending UFA. So it seems like the smaller, lesser important additions will probably be made before a deadline, but the bigger, more major additions will probably be made in the off season. So just to recap for the Metro Division, Rangers probably going to add, looking for a winger, looking for a center, really do need some help there, so expect them to try and aggressively add, could also add depth defenseman. Canes may want to go for it this year, could potentially do that. They could look at Gensel, Buchnevich for Toronto. They're going to be looking for an upgrade on the forward group, someone who can help them score, so we'll have to wait and see on that. Flyers probably going to still sell Sealer and Walker, especially with the contract negotiations where they are right now. Could definitely change, but at that point in time, it seems like that's the most likely thing. And then maybe they add a cheap and inexpensive forward and goaltender to try and go for the playoffs. So let's wait and see on that. Islanders looking to try and probably just stay pat. They're not used to selling. Could maybe have a few pieces, lower end pieces. Not something that'll hugely upset their progress, but still interesting stuff there for the Islanders. Caps could definitely make a lot of moves. Penguins could definitely make a lot of moves. They both have a lot of interesting pieces that could be moved at the deadline. For the Caps, Dowd, Mantha, Pacioretty, Edmondson, Oshie. For the Penguins, Riley Smith, Marcus Pettersson, Alex Nedeljkovic, Jake Gensel. So we'll have to wait and see of those two teams, but with those two teams where they are right now, it probably will wind up being sellers. And on top of that, with the Columbus Blue Jackets, most likely all of their bigger decisions are going to come in the offseason, but they could still move guys like Roslovic and Provorov before a deadline. So we'll have to wait and see on that. Love to hear your guys' thoughts on all this down in the comment section below. What do you think about the landscape of the Eastern Conference? Who do you think are buyers, sellers? Who do you think gets moved before a deadline? Definitely love to hear your guys' thoughts on all of that down in the comment section below. That's what I'm going to talk about for today. Don't forget to stay tuned for March's trade deadline video on Friday. Doing a live trade deadline video talking about the trade deadline, starting at 9:30 a.m. Pacific time, 12:30 p.m. Eastern time. I'll talk about all the trades that happen on trade deadline day, so don't forget to stay tuned for that. That's what I'm going to talk about for today. Remember to like this video, and for real, to subscribe down below. Thank you for all your support. I never love you guys. So if you haven't already, don't forget to hit the subscribe button down below, and don't forget to leave a comment down in the comment section below discussing all the discussed in today's video. I also have a blog talking about news, rumors, analysis, stuff like that. So if you check that out, leave a link down in the description below, and I can't wait to see you guys all for next video. See you guys soon.